I have a lot for you today, so we're going to jump right into the devotion with our prayer of surrender, beginning with our prayer of surrender. Spirit of truth, carry me where you will. Bring to me what you will. Take from me what you will. Awaken in me what you will. The Christ man is around me. The Christ mind is in me. The Christ power flows through me. And the Christ mystery exists as me. I believe it, I perceive it, and now I receive it. I am surrendered. Amen. And so it is. We are quickly coming to the close of the month of March, where our theme in the devotional has been the power of now. So speaking about power, as we've said before, the best way to have and maintain your power is to not give it away to other people, to any government or church or other organization, or even to your own thoughts. And that's what we're going to talk about a little in today's devotion, which is entitled, The Problem with Making Assumptions. Making assumptions is a thought process, and we can give our power away to an assumption. So let's read the affirmation together. Today, I will consciously question my assumptions in order to make the best judgment possible. All right, here's the text. Have you ever wondered why we tend to jump to negative conclusions more frequently than positive ones? It's quite literally the way our brains are wired. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the teaching too. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, it was important to be able to size up another human who came into your space. Those who could make quick judgments or assumptions about others were the ones who survived. Assessing the negative or threat level was a crucial skill that is still with us. Prehistoric man had to notice whether or not there was a club in someone's hand before they noticed anything else about them. Positive attributes had to take a back seat to anything that could negatively affect him. So, when we have limited information about a person or situation, our brain automatically starts trying to fill in the gaps with the negative first. Everything our brains do is for the purpose of protecting us by avoiding uncertainty as much as possible. The irony of this is that uncertainty, or not knowing, is where we have to be in order to get the next piece of information. Being uncertain is the only thing that causes us to question, and questioning is the only way we ever learn anything new. Being aware of this helps us learn how to make assumptions responsibly. We're always going to assume things. It's part of our nature. But in order to grow, we have to challenge and question our assumptions and hold off making a final judgment until we have more information. All right, so I'm not going to add anything to that today. We're just going to go on to the ending prayer for our time of devotion. All-knowing God, help me today to be more aware of how I make assumptions, and let me use this ability responsibly. Amen. Now, before we move on to the teaching, I just want to give you one quick example that we've talked about before of how you can make a positive assumption. Making assumptions isn't always negative. Like it just said, there is a way to assume responsibly. I did a teaching some years ago where I quoted a lot from a woman named Brene Brown. And she told a story of going to her husband and asking him a question about some research she was doing. She asked him, "Do you believe that most people are doing the best they can with their lives most of the time, given their individual circumstances?" And he said, "I really don't know. Let me think about it for a little bit and get back with you." So a little while later, he came back and said, "I still don't know whether or not most people are doing the best they can. And there's really no way for me to know that. But this is what I do know. I know that my life is better and that I feel better about life when I assume that they are." So that's an example of making a conscious choice to make a positive assumption about people or situations rather than a negative one. And that goes a long way in creating a positive space around you as you're going through your life. People who are overly suspicious of things and of other people, People who are always thinking that everyone's out to get them, they drive me crazy. I don't know why that is a particular pet peeve of mine, but it is. So I said all that to say, let's work on making positive assumptions rather than negative ones. Let's give things the benefit of the doubt, as they say, and use our higher mind rather than our ancient reptilian brain. Okay, deep breath in. And I'm going to take a sip of water before we say our connection affirmation together. I allow perfect health in my body, perfect peace in my mind, perfect unconditional love in my heart, and the perfect divine timing of spirit to guide my life in thought, word, and deed. Last week I said that was the final teaching of our book, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and I thought it was going to be until I got to the end of it and realized we were not quite done with it. So there are only a few pages left in the book, so we're going to use them as a springboard into a different but very similar topic, and I'm just going to call today The Final Flight Part 2. Now, I understand that that's a little oxymoronic because if something is final, it's not supposed to have a part 2. But I think that's symbolic as well, because today we're going to talk a little bit about that there is always more to be created. There is always more to be reshaped, reformed, alchemized into something new. Nothing is ever final because we are eternal beings. We just take different forms as we transcend through various levels of consciousness. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit with Jonathan. So let's check in with where he is. Last week, we talked about the circle of curious gulls that was growing bigger and bigger around him and his little band of outcast students. We talked specifically about the ones who came to him wounded and in desperate need of help and healing, just like more and more people are now coming to us, as they have for many years, for healing and acceptance and guidance as they navigate their way through the murky waters that organized religion has become. And we all pretty much got very emotional last week reading about that, because we know where they are. We have felt the way they are feeling. So I'm going back to the book and reading now. The crowd grew larger every day, coming to question, to idolize, to scorn. They are saying in the flock that if you are not the son of the great gull himself, Fletcher told Jonathan one morning, that you are 1,000 years ahead of your time. Jonathan sighed. The price of being misunderstood, he thought. They call you a devil or they call you a god. Now that part reminded me of an old 70s contemporary Christian song by a band called Fireworks. I love that band. I don't know how many of you remember. They came and sang at our very first summer Alpha outdoor festival that we used to have, Alpha 79. They were our special guest. And so the song that they sang said this: when John came, talking about John the Baptist, he ate no bread and he drank no wine, but they called him a devil. And when the Son of Man came, then Jesus came, he ate meat and he drank some wine, and they called him a sinner. So the point is, it doesn't matter which side of the spectrum you fall on, like John the Baptist in the wilderness, almost like a wild man hermit, the original nature boy, or like Jesus, who regularly partied and associated with prostitutes and tax collectors. Either way, religious fundamentalists are going to find a way to discredit you. In the end, that's why they crucified Jesus, because he dared to call himself a God. So the point is, you just can't win with religious people. And Jonathan, our seagull Jonathan, understands this all too well. So next in the story, we actually witness a near-death experience, okay? We kind of skipped over that on my first reading, but that's a very deep part. I'm going to read about it. It said it happened just a week later. Fletcher was demonstrating the elements of high-speed flying to a class of new students. He had just pulled out of his dive from 7,000 feet, a long gray streak firing a few inches above the beach, when a young bird on its first flight glided directly into his path, calling for its mother. With a tenth of a second to avoid the youngster, Fletcher Lynn Siegel snapped hard to the left at something over 200 miles per hour into a cliff of solid granite. It was for him as though the rock were a giant, hard door into another world, a burst of fear and shock and blackness as he hit. And then he was adrift in a strange, strange sky, forgetting, remembering, forgetting, afraid and sad and sorry. The voice came to him as it had on the first day he met Jonathan Livingston Siegel. The trick, Fletcher, is that we are trying to overcome our limitations in order, patiently. We don't tackle flying through rock until a little later on in the program. Jonathan, what are you doing here? The cliff. Didn't I die? Oh, Fletch, come on, think. If you were talking to me now, then obviously you didn't die, did you? What you did manage to do was change your level of consciousness rather abruptly. It's your choice now. You can stay here and learn on this level, which is quite a bit higher than the one you left, or you can go back and keep working with the flock. Now, I want to stop right here and interject. As I have probably talked about many times before, I've done quite a bit of studying and reading what they call NDEs, near-death experiences. And one of the things I learned from them is that you always have a choice to stay where you are when you first make your transition or to come back into your body. And I've always found that thought very comforting, that our free will doesn't end even when we move from one level of consciousness to another. Even there, God allows us to choose. So Fletcher Siegel has been offered this choice, and he says, I want to go back to the flock, of course. I've barely begun with the new group. Very well, Fletcher. Remember what we were saying about one's body being nothing more than thought itself? Fletcher shook his head, stretched his wings, and opened his eyes at the base of the cliff, in the center of the whole flock, which had assembled. There was a great clamor of squawks and screes from the crowd when first he moved. He lives. He that was dead lives. Touched him with a wingtip, brought him to life, the son of the great gull. No, he denies it. He's a devil come to break up the flock. There were 4,000 gulls in the crowd, frightened at what had happened, and the cry, devil, went through them like the wind of an ocean storm. Eyes glazed, beaks sharp, they closed in to destroy. Would you feel better if we left, Fletcher? Asked Jonathan. I certainly wouldn't object too much if we did. Instantly they stood together a half-mile away, and the flashing beaks of the mob closed in on empty air. Okay, so let's unpack that passage a little. Fletcher flies into the side of a cliff and basically dies, but physically. But as we know, there is nothing but a very thin veil between life and death. And while briefly on the other side, Fletcher is presented with a choice to stay here in this new level of consciousness or to go back to the one he came from. And he chooses to go back because he feels his work is not done. So when his spirit comes back into his body, the whole flock is standing around to witness it. They had seen what happened to him. And when he began to move again, they were all excited and aflutter because they knew they had just seen a miracle. And then some of them tried to attribute it to Jonathan. They said he touched him and he healed him. So they tried to make Jonathan a god. But when Jonathan tried to explain to them that it wasn't him who did it, that Fletcher had just simply made the choice himself to come back, well, then they switched it up and they called him a devil. So it's not really clear to me whether they're calling Jonathan a devil for denying he was the one who performed the miracle, or they're calling Fletcher a devil for being able to resurrect himself without any help. It doesn't really matter. The point is, people, as I have said, especially religious people who have been indoctrinated into certain ideas, will always fear what they don't understand, anything that falls outside of what they have been taught. So when Jonathan said, no, I didn't do it, he did it himself, they went into attack mode because to them that was blasphemy. So, okay, so are you seeing some parallels about whenever you try to contradict what has been taught, people are coming for you. But then what happened? Jonathan did his little time travel trick again, and he whisked Fletcher away from the angry mob by just the power of his thoughts. So, I think there's so much more that we have yet to learn about the different dimensions. I recently heard someone talk about this same phenomenon in relation or in reference to Jesus and how he moved differently and how his body behaved differently during the time in between the resurrection and when he ascended. After he rose, if you'll remember, he stayed for a period of time on the earth with his disciples before he ascended into heaven. And that's when the Bible says things happen like he would just appear in a room with them. It says he wasn't there, and then he was. He didn't come through a door. So now that we have the science of quantum physics to help us unravel this a little, we know that it just might be possible Jesus was shifting in and out of different dimensions during that time. I just thought that was interesting. Back to Jonathan and Fletcher. Religious folks always fear and then fight what they don't understand. So the mob tried to descend on Jonathan and Fletcher, but they escaped. Back to the book. By morning, the flock had forgotten their insanity, but Fletcher had not. Jonathan, he asked, remember what you said a long time ago about loving the flock enough to return to it and help it learn? Sure. I don't understand how you manage to love a mob of birds that has just tried to kill you. Oh, Fletch, you don't love that. You don't love hatred and evil, of course. You have to practice seeing the real gull, the good in every one of them, and to help them see it in themselves. I remember a fierce young bird, for instance, Fletcher Lynn Seagull was his name, just been made outcast, ready to fight the flock to the death, getting a start on building his own bitter hell out on the far cliffs. And here today, he is building his own heaven instead and leading the whole flock in that direction. Okay, so there it is, the culminating point of the whole book. We can all create for ourselves a heaven or a hell, wherever we are, in whatever dimension or level of consciousness we are currently living. And that's what the rest of this teaching today will focus on. But to wrap this book up, I'm going to read one more short passage. Jonathan and Fletcher have a little more conversation where Jonathan lets Fletcher know it's time for him to pick up the baton now and become the teacher because he's leaving. Jonathan is about to go away into a higher dimension. It says, a moment later, Jonathan's body wavered in the air, shimmering, and began to go transparent. Don't let them spread silly rumors about me or make me a god, okay, Fletch? Jonathan, poor Fletch, don't believe what your eyes are telling you. All they show is limitation. Look with your understanding. Find out what you already know, and you'll see the way to fly. The shimmering stopped. Jonathan Seagull had vanished into the air. After a time, Fletcher Gull dragged himself into the sky to face a brand new group of students, eager for their first lesson. No limits, Jonathan, he thought, and he smiled. His race to learn had just begun. So that is actually the end of the book. And we're going to continue on for a few minutes more on that last, and like I said, I think the biggest theme of this story, our ability as divine beings to go beyond the limitations of our minds and create a heaven for ourselves right where we are. I love that part that I read just a minute ago about Fletcher. It says when Jonathan said, I remember, he was reminding him of who he was. I remember a fierce young bird who had just been made an outcast, ready to fight the flock to the death, getting a start on building his own bitter hell out on the far cliffs. And here he is today building his own heaven instead. So in order to do that, we've got to get in touch with our own inner wisdom and with our divine creativity. We're going to talk now about how to do that by going back to some information I gave you a couple of years ago in a teaching that I called, You're Just Making That Up. And it started with this quote. There is no doubt that creativity is the most important human resource of all. Without creativity, there would be no progress, and we would be forever repeating the same patterns. Edward de Bono. So we see this everywhere, this repeating of patterns over and over in our individual lives as well as in the collective. So how do we stop the cycle? The cycle of getting stuck in our ideas of and our belief in lack, limitation, sickness, war, all those things that are common to us here in this earth plane. How do we break free? How do we get off the merry-go-round and start moving forward or upward, whichever way you want to look at it? I think we've realized by now that no one's coming to save us. If we want a new world that's different from the one we have now, if we, like Jonathan Livingston Seagull and all those who eventually followed him, want more out of life than just flying from the shore to the fishing boats to eat a few little scraps and then back, if we want a world and a life where we can soar, then we're going to have to create it ourselves. And thankfully, God has given us that ability. So today is March the 26th. We're just a little over 10 days past what is known as the Ides of March, or March the 15th. And when I originally gave this teaching, that's the day that it was, March 15th. So the historical significance of this date is that it's when Julius Caesar was assassinated, and famously, he was warned ahead of time, by a seer who said to him, "Beware the Ides of March," which when he got that warning, he just laughed it off and ignored it to his detriment because they killed him. But I want to give you a different warning today. I want to tell you to beware of people who say to you, "You're just making that up." Anytime you dare to paint a different picture or vision of the future or even of the present than they believe is possible. When someone says to you, when they say to you, "You're just making that up," it's intended to be derogatory, implying that you're lying. "Oh, you're just making that up." However, what I want to propose to you today, that your answer to these people should be, "Why, yes, I am. And furthermore, so are you." We're all making it up. We are all creating all of the time, whether we are aware of it or not. Everything that's going on in the world right now, everything that's going on in your personal life, we have created by our combined thoughts and actions as a collective. So if we want to see the outward manifestation change, we've got to change what's going on in our imagination, because that's where manifestation comes from. As above, so below. As within, so without. We bring whatever is in our imagination into manifestation. The whole world today seems to be moving from one crisis to another, and there seems to be less and less downtime between these various crises for us to catch our breath. And because of this, the people who have not figured out how to create their own reality, or who don't even yet realize they have the ability to create or change the reality, they're having a pretty rough time right now. So we're in a state of chaos, so to speak, but that's not necessarily a negative thing. Here's a little different perspective of it from our friend Andrew Martin. He says, chaos is a sign of creation. Chaos is the bridge between the ending of the old and a new beginning. Chaos is the return to pure potential. We often refer to it as the void. He refers to it here as something he calls the zero state. Here's how it works. You set an intention for something. You pour your energy into it, and your intention creates the structure or scaffolding that surrounds whatever it is you want to create and holds it in place. You've seen these big buildings. They don't just start laying bricks. You have, sometimes if it's high enough, they have to put all this scaffolding up to kind of hold it in place until it gets set, and then they take the scaffolding away. So when you see chaos in your life, on the planet around you, That's just a sign that the scaffolding is now being dismantled and taken apart because the new creation is ready to stand on its own. But when anything gets broken open, it releases energy. War is a form of energy. So when you see it, yes, pray for the people who are being affected by it. Pray for the well-being of all souls involved, not just the one side you think is right. Yes, pray that everyone is healed and healthy and well and gets what they need to continue to thrive in their life. But also understand that chaos is for the greater good sometimes. We've talked about that with forest fires. They're very destructive, but in the end, that's the best fertile soil to regrow a forest that there is. It is proof that the old things and systems are ending and new ones are being built. And the energy that's generated by chaos gives each and every one of us something to tap into and ask ourselves, okay, what am I going to do with this energy? How am I going to direct it? Because the truth is, we don't create energy. Science even tells us this. Matter and energy are neither created or destroyed. All we do is direct it or transform it from one form to another. It is our job to connect with the energy of chaos and direct it into a new form, the form of our intention. That's what we're actually doing when we say we're creating. Now, time out. I want to stop right here and connect this to what we know about the creation story in the book of Genesis in the Bible. My brother has taught us before that the actual meaning of the Greek word that is used there as to create actually means to reform or reshape, to transmute from one form into another. The energy was already there, even though the Bible describes it was formless. Remember, it says it says the earth was without form and void, but it was there. It existed. God reshaped it into something else, into something new. And that's what we have the power to do with chaos as well. Back to Andrew now. He says, that's what we're doing when we manifest. We're just moving energy from one place to another and putting it into a new form, one step of which includes chaos. And we just read a beautiful story where this principle was being demonstrated. That's what Jonathan and Chang and Fletcher and all the rest of them were doing. Okay, they were learning how to move energy. Okay, so when you see things coming apart, breaking down, bless the structure that it was. Thank it for being what it was. Bless its ending. Bless the energy for returning to its formless state, and then bless its beginning in its new form. Bless it all. All right, that's wonderful. Let's move now from Andrew Martin to my brother. We're going to talk about a paradox, one of those upside down kingdom ideas. He was preaching a sermon not too very long ago about how we create, and he brought it into the evolutionary aspects of our brain. Let me share with you what he said. We know that we create our life with our thoughts, and that there are only two levels of consciousness we ever create those thoughts from: fear or love. When we are creating from fear, that is our reptilian brain at work. Okay, I won't take the time to go into it. We've talked about this many times. Our reptilian brains is that ancient brain that was formed millions of years ago that was only concerned with survival. Okay, what we were talking about earlier in the devotion. So he says, creating from fear is our reptilian brain at work, but it takes us using our higher brain functions to be able to do what Jesus desired when he said, "Let your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven." Or, said another way, let it come in manifestation as it is in imagination. And that's the key. Creating from love involves using your higher brain function of imagination. I want to talk a little now about the process of alchemy. And I'm going to be referencing a talk by a woman named Jumana Sophia. She says, alchemy is taking something that is worth less, not worthless as in worth nothing, but worth less, and turning it into something that is worth more. For example, turning lead into gold. For our purposes today, we're talking about transforming the old world and its systems, its structures, or your life. You can look at it individually, the structures you've created in your life, and turning them into something new, or creating heaven instead of hell right where we are, wherever we are. She says the spiritual alchemists of this generation are the people who know how to take in poison and transmute it into medicine. As we know, a lot of times a medicine or substance that heals can also have an aspect to it that's poisonous if it's given in the wrong dose or not handled properly. We all know that antivenom that is used for snake bites is made from the snake venom itself. In order to get to the part that's medicinal, you've got to take in the poison first, then somehow separate out or strip away the harmful part. Sometimes you have to take a house that's falling apart down to its foundation before you can rebuild it. There is a fine line between deconstruction and destruction or demolition. All three of those words and their corresponding actions have slightly different meanings, but it can sometimes be difficult to tell the difference. When you're deconstructing something, you could also use the word dismantling here. It means you are taking it apart strategically. Like the example she gives of a house, if you're taking it down for the purpose of rebuilding it better and stronger, sometimes that process often looks a lot like destruction just for destruction's sake. When a demolition wrecking ball goes into the side of a house, it looks like from the outside, oh, they're just destroying that. But deconstruction means, yeah, they're taking it apart, but only for the purpose of rebuilding it. Okay. The bottom line is we have built a house that now needs to come down. So however it gets dismantled, whether it's deconstructed piece by piece in an orderly way or violently demolished, either way, it's coming down because it's just time for it to come down. And let's don't attach specific places and people to that idea. I'm talking about systems and structures. The real question, once the house is down, however it happens, even if it comes at the hands of people we view as evil, how are we going to rebuild it? So the important thing is not how it came down, but how we're going to rebuild it. That's where all of our focus should be right now. How do we transmute the poison present in the old system into something that has the ability to heal? How do we spiritually alchemize things? So for more on this, we're going to go back to Andrew Martin. He says, we're always creating. We live in a creative universe. Every thought, every action creates something on some level. Chaos is just a sign that we are in the midst of transformation. What is it that Carlton always used to say? We're not in trouble, we're in transition. And that can actually be a really good thing because when things are in a chaotic state, it means they are unbound. It means they are formless. It means the system that held all the power of that energy is breaking down and returning to the zero state or to the void. It means now we have something to work with. Once all the old energy is unleashed, we are swimming in potential. So when we look at things like suffering, turmoil, violence, and war, it's easy to be duped into thinking that that external world is creating you or us. No, we created it. What we're seeing right now is just the release of the collective shadow. By the time something reaches physical form, it's old news. It was energetically created long before. The physical manifestation doesn't create the reality. The reality, which we create with our imagination, creates the manifestation. It doesn't work the other way around. The reality is always internal first. So when you look around at the chaos and you don't know what to do or how to help, the answer is to be generous with your imagination. You possess the same divine gifts and abilities as the Creator. He, she, it gave us this divine spark, and the source of that spark is endless. It is never diminished. The more we give, the brighter our light shines. And when you know who you are, you create automatically, just like nature. Nobody sits looking out their window at the apple tree in their yard, wondering what's going to happen come spring. They know the tree is going to bloom. It's going to produce apples because it knows what it is. When you know what you are, your creations will be just that sure. Nature is also generous. Those apples are there for anyone passing by to take. The owner of the apple tree might stop you from picking the apples, but the tree won't. It's nature's nature, as it were, to be generous, to give of itself. And when we know who we are, it's easier for us to be generous because we understand we are endless and limitless, just like God, just like Jonathan Siegel and all his fellow gulls realize themselves. Generosity is a state of being that is reflected all around us. And generosity generates, which is another way to say creates. Generosity is the key. You don't meet fear with fear. You meet it with light. You don't meet rage with rage or outrage. You meet it with love. And when you do this, the energy moves forward and up. So what did I say at the beginning? How do we get off the merry-go-round? How do we move forward or up? How do we break these cycles? This is how. Meeting fear with fear and rage with rage only creates more of both and keeps us going around and around and around. So I want to stop here and interject something that I've told you before that Esther Hicks said about what to tell people who tell you that you're crazy for believing you can create a new reality. Or that you can keep believing and imagining even when the reality all around you is seemingly in chaos and there's no physical evidence that what you're imagining and believing will ever come into manifestation. She says this: so when people ask you how you're coming with a specific goal, your only answer is, it's right on track. And if they ask you if it's begun to unfold in a way that you can see, answer them the same way. It's right on track. And when they ask you what physical evidence you have that gives you license to feel so certain, then you say, I have left that old modality far, far behind because I found out I was going about it backwards. When I demanded that I get what I was looking for first so that I could have an emotional response to what has already happened, I am no longer creating. I'm just observing and reacting. Then I've joined the ranks of millions of others trying to control the conditions so that I can have a better feeling response. But what you want to be doing instead is creating the conditions, not responding to them. So the question becomes, how do you create a condition? And you would answer that question by saying, I have learned I am healthier in my imagination than I am in my observation, because when I imagine, I can make it exactly the way I want it to be. And they might say to you then, oh, you're a dreamer. You're not a realist. Upon which you would say, oh, I never face reality. I create it. I don't look at what is, if I don't prefer it or like what it is, of course, and regurgitate or reproduce more of it. I look at what is, which automatically causes me to launch a desire for something different, for something better. And then I feel my way into vibrational alignment with that different, better, higher version of reality. I love that. And it fits perfectly with what Andrew Martin is saying. You don't meet fear with fear, violence with violence, war with war, rage with rage, because that only creates, reproduces, regurgitates it, or as Esther put it here, more of the same. If we want higher and better, we've got to rise higher in our vibration and be better in our actions. We've got to forgive those who are trying to kill us, just as Jesus did. Just as Jonathan and Fletcher had to. And I also love what she said there. I don't face reality, I create it. That's very similar to what I said earlier. When you share a dream or a vision of how you see reality and people tell you, oh, you're just making that up, you answer, I certainly am. And be proud of that. Because somebody has to. Somebody's got to have a dream for a better future. Somebody's got to hold the high vibration of the place we want to go instead of staying down here in the muck of where we are, just spinning around and around. Someone's got to want to fly higher, just as Jonathan did. So how do we become those souls who are willing to believe the new world and imagine the new world into existence? Once more, back to Andrew. What are you generating? What are you creating with your field, which is a combination of your thoughts, your actions, and where you focus your attention? Are you focusing needlessly on sources of information that are negative and dark? Are you doom scrolling on the internet, looking for things that validate your worry and anxiety about the chaos that you're seeing? We all do that. I had to stop myself earlier this month and say, the month of March, I will not look at anything like that on the internet. And it's been a lot better, so I don't think I'm going to go back to it. Or are you being generous by creating good with your thoughts? Okay, so I really created this little practice. I'm serious. I have to live out the same things I teach. Every time in the past month that I have thought to grab my phone, and just because I'm bored or because I'm worried and I'm looking for that answer from somebody, I say, no, I'm not going to pick up the phone. I'm not going to turn on the computer. I'm going to sit here with this. I'm going to go inside and I'm going to ask God. I'm going to ask my higher self. I'm not going to go outside myself for this answer. I'm not going to try to find things that say, see, I knew it. Okay. All right. So he says, are you being generous by creating good with your thoughts? Are you generating a better world? Are you expecting more? Are you requiring higher from yourself first, then others? Generosity says, when you are met with a lack of compassion, be the compassion that is lacking. When you are in an environment where there is no light, shine yours. When you come into a place where there is no love or inclusion, embody love and model inclusion. You have that choice. You might say, well, I feel misunderstood and unsafe in those environments. Okay, you're entitled to feel misunderstood and unsafe, but if you continue to perceive a lack of understanding, a lack of understanding is what you will continue to experience. The outer doesn't create the inner. The inner creates the outer. If you keep feeling misunderstood, people will continue to misunderstand you. Have you ever heard somebody say, this always happens? This has happened to me my whole life. Well, for the most part, it's because they're expecting it to always happen. That's all they see. Whenever and wherever you see darkness, shine brighter. When you begin to be the change you want to see in the world, you realize you have the power to shift any circumstances you're in for the better. Our inner reality is the primary reality that controls the outer reality, which is secondary. It can be no other way. It is divine law. So if you're finding yourself in a dark place, maybe you're there because you're the light it needs. You are not here to save anybody, only to remind them of their own divinity, especially those who have forgotten. And the brighter you shine your light, the easier it is for them to see theirs. When you do not see divinity present in any situation, be the source of it. And let your prayers be for the well-being and highest good of all souls involved, because we all drink from the same well. And whatever you're pouring into that collective well, you're drinking too. So don't be wishing harm on people, even if we think they're wrong or even evil. If you want to be the source of purity and clarity and healing, that must be what is pouring out of you, and it must exclude no one. If your ideas of inclusion and diversity do not extend to those who hold other beliefs than you, to those who seemingly oppose your ideology, to those who ask questions that are challenging to you, then it's full of, and he said a word that I'm not going to say, but he said it. If you're not walking your talk, it's just performance. If in a room of 100 people, you are the only one who remembers the truth of who you are, then stand up, shine your light, and let it become infectious. Let your generosity become infectious, your peace and your compassion and your love, because thoughts, feelings, and energy are indeed infectious. If we're going to have a virus, let's let it be all the good stuff. Let's start spreading that. Be a source of truth. Be a source of the truth that gives others the opportunity to stop and say, oh my God, I've had it wrong this whole time, and believe that they can do this too. Be generous with your ability to allow room for redemption. Wow. So what he's talking about here isn't easy stuff, but what Jesus did wasn't easy either. And speaking of that, that is exactly what Jesus did. He didn't judge anybody. Remember, he partied with the tax collectors and the prostitutes on a regular basis. He just allowed his own light to shine so brightly that others were drawn to it. And once they were there in his presence, his vibration was so high that they either had to jump up to it and start seeing things as he saw them, okay? They had to start adapting to this higher and better version and vision of the world, or they had to leave. His light was too bright to stay in and remain in a low vibration. Okay? In the Bible, we talk a lot about not resisting things, but I think it's just kind of a word play. But in the Bible where it says resist the devil and he will flee, I don't think that refers to resisting as in fighting. How you resist the devil or devilish evil things is just by staying in your light. And then it can't stay. It has to flee. It's not like you're driving it away. You're just being who you are, and it can't stay in that presence unless it jumps up onto that same vibration, because resonance is one of the laws of the universe. All right, so nobody ever said creating a new world, helping to build the new earth would be easy. But as I said before, somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to be willing to do what it takes to jump off the merry-go-round, to stop just going back and forth from the shoreline to the boat, back to the shoreline, ho-hum every day. This is just my life. Guess I got to accept it. Can't do anything about it. My mama gave this to me through genetics. I don't know. So we've got to have some people that are going to stop that, like Jonathan, and say, you know what? That's not my truth. I'm going to fly. I'm going to soar. And I'm going to do it just because I want to, because that's what I was made for. All right. So the word new means it's never been done before. It's never been seen before. So once again, I will say, when people hear you talk about a new world that they think is impossible, a new way of being, and their response is, you're just making that up. Say to them, I sure am. Won't you join me? Amen? Amen. All right, let's stand together and sing our ending song, believing with every fiber of our being that this is the truth, that we are blessed always.
Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say amen. Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say amen.
Join us tonight at 9:30 for the podcast that my brother does, the Carlton Pearson Legacy Channel. Wednesday night, 6:30. Friday morning, 7 a.m. And Sunday is Easter. Wear your white and pink and let's celebrate Easter together. Do you have something that you want to say on camera? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Goodbye. Be at peace. We love you.